Today, we're shining a very bright light on standards and structures. If you ever wondered how data gets from I clicked to it's already here, stay with us. Hi, welcome. Ruqayyah, Dr. Bernard Lee. Welcome to this podcast. I am Arturo Santiago. I'm the host, and let's have a conversation about BICSI, structured cables, and then how you, what's your involvement with BICSI?
BICSI was something that started off when I was back in Malaysia. So I took the BICSI course and I became an RCDD back then. Again, mainly for a passion of understanding how the challenges of structured cabling. You may think that, like you say in the beginning, you click and it arrives. But where does the data travel from the source to us? And how all the cables, all the final fibers, the racks and all this. I was very intrigued to know how was it installed and how it works every time we click on it.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Both of you being sharers at one point. What's the responsibility of a chair within BICSI?
Would you like to start?
Well, I think mainly is to be of service to the members here. There's over 100 members, BICSI members in just UK and Ireland, and they do have their needs in terms of training and getting their CEC points and someone to communicate in dissemination of information from the BICSI HQ. And of course, at the same time, it's also our task to expand the reach of BICSI.
Okay.
BICSI has been there in different names for over 70 years. It started back in the US itself. But it is, in a way, a professional body that ensures best practices.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And I'm writing standards. So I completely concur. And just to add as well, in relation to it's a hub. So to be a chair is to ensure that the hub is well maintained and the sustainability of the hub. So it's not only bringing new people into the fold, it's the existing credential holders that have held on to their credential, that we get inquiries all across the UK and Ireland about the CEC credits, about the conference credits, about where that they can go in relation to obtaining that, to keeping their credential active. And so because BICSI every 3 years, and it is important to maintain industry best practices because things are evolving all the time. Technology is constantly, rapidly changing. And so to be within the BICSI hemisphere is always to speak with like-minded professionals across all the different channels of, as I mentioned before, the wider structure of how everything works. And so it is imperative that keeping the world connected, yes, but keeping the professionals that keep the world connected is very important as well.
Okay, so Ruqayyah, let me go in to another question regarding not BICSI, but what BICSI does. Structured cabling. In a brief way, can you just let us know what structured cabling is?
Sure.
And then I have a follow-up question about structured cabling as well.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Yes, the imagery I would have is, think of the road that you drive down. The road is permanent. The road is physical. Structured cabling is the physical layer. It's the bedrock. It's something that you can feel and you can touch. And it's end to end. Each cable is end to end. When you lay down the physical layer and the actual physical entity, then that provides the road. If you think of the car, as you're driving the car is the network that sits on the road. But remember, the road is physical. It's laid down, it's permanent. That's why they call it the permanent link. And then the car is the network. You have to drive the car on top of the motorway, highway. And then you have the person. Now, the person that's driving the car is the device. So the device, whether you're connected to your laptop, whether you're connected to the Wi-Fi, you sitting in the car, you're driving the traffic, you're driving the usage, but essentially the person is the connected device. However broad that may be, in every single device out there, it needs to be connected. And so as much as now there's 7 layers of the OSI, and as professionals in IT, we always come back to this because you can place people's professional accolade in which areas of the OSI. The physical layer, unfortunately, has always been overlooked by the young generation, and also I would say mostly across the board. No one actually understands, and again, your question is stemmed from no one actually understands how things are connected. Mm-hmm. And it's very sad because it affects everything. It affects everything that goes on within the physical world. And that's essentially what leaps it to the digital world. And so when you're looking at structured cabling, it's not just structured cabling, it's societies of ecosystems that rely on the digital ecosystem to do your work, to do your shopping, to do every aspect, to driving your car in the real world, which cars have, and they have fiber in it, the new ones. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the underground cabling, and then you've got the CCTV cameras that require copper cabling and power cabling. And then you've got the wireless access point. So when you go on your phone and you click that Wi-Fi button and network, you're just looking at the network to connect to. Look up, have a look at the cable trays, have a look at the conduit, have a look at the wireless access point that actually connects your phone. And that in turn is connected to a local area network. A local area network within a building is it's secure network, but then it connects to the public exchange. And the public exchange is the outside plant cabling. And then the outside plant cabling connects to the launch pad, which then connects to the submarine cabling. And so in the world that's currently, yes, very, very well connected, you have to understand how it all connects.
Yeah. I love the passion you have
a lot of passion
when you're explaining this.
I
want to make a statement because and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know a lot about structured cabling, but I asked you what structured cabling was, and you explained it beautifully.
Thank you.
I want to take it back a little bit and ask. I want to make the statement. How did to my understanding, structured cabling came along as a standard, and I thought, until I heard your explanation, I thought that it was only for like data centers. But now that hearing you talk about it, it's structured cabling is everywhere.
It's everywhere.
So, in my mind, structured cabling came because there was a need to standardize how everything was routed. Is that true, or is it sort of true?
Let's take it back a step.
Okay.
Let's go back to history. Okay. The UK is a great example of that. Post World War II, and I'm not going to be one of those that goes that far back, but post World War II, the infrastructure of the UK had to change. Mm-hmm. And all of the cabling and the infrastructure is still used. Obviously, I wouldn't say the actual cables themselves, I'd say the pathways are still used today. Mm. Now, if you think about old films, what you watch, and you have a person, mostly it was ladies, because obviously post-war time, there was more ladies than men, and they worked in the telecommunication offices. Now, what they would do is they would have a listening device. If a call came in, it would pop up on the screen, and they were the physical public exchange, and they would route it and direct it to where that call needs to go. Now, in today's terms, that's practically the same, only there is no ladies that are directing the traffic. It's all switches. So if you think about you've got structured cabling, and then if you think of pathways, you've got one pathway and then it diverts. Switches is what makes it divert. This way or that way. Now, if you think about traffic, let's go back to the analogy of the highway. Everywhere has traffic. They have bottlenecks. So what do they do when there's bottlenecks? They add another road, or they add a few roads, or they add another passway, overpass, underpass. Over time, that's essentially what structured cabling has evolved to. Now, getting into data centers. Data centers also have to connect to the local grid, which essentially is the public exchange. The locality varies from time to time. Power is discussed within data centers, yes. Water usage is discussed within data centers, yes. And those are the gray space. What is not understood properly, well, obviously to us it is, but I'd say to the wider audience, is the white space. The white space within the thing. So I am tying this all up. If you think of, you're on a highway and then you're passing through houses, or you're passing through residential areas, essentially within data centers. That's essentially what it is. It's a real-tree space of where the collective data is stored. You have so many different data centers. This word is getting used a lot. You have a data center for the traffic control when you're driving your car. You have a data center for warehouses. You have some private data centers in relation to research. You have, most recently, I'll talk about AI data centers. AI data centers is a complete game changer. Why? Because AI data centers puts the white space at the forefront. If the white space doesn't work, nothing around it will work. And the white space essentially is the structured cabling, is the networks. The white space is the servers. The white space is in its core the connectivity. Everything else is cooling down the connectivity or is surrounding it. Now, let's take it back a step. And I do like to read history because everything is on a loop. The best societies in histories understood their ecosystems. You cannot design, and I had these discussions in the Middle East, you cannot design a top tier AI data center with the same design of an AI data center in Europe. And you can't design a European AI data center with the same one in Australia or in Asia or so forth. You cannot do that. It requires understanding of the ecosystem. The Middle East is very hot and humid. You have to adhere to that because the equipment is sensitive. In relation to the cold climate, you can use the heat because it's very cold. I wrote an article on this 2 years ago in relation to remodeling the AI data centers and the data centers itself and making it serve the ecosystems. And one of the examples I used in my article was Sweden. In Stockholm, they've got the data centers and they have excessive heat. And I really, till this day, I don't understand why the UK is not adopting this, because it should, especially with rising energy costs. The generative heat from the data centers can be used and recycled to go to heat the homes. In the UK, we have very, very high energy prices that a lot of pensioners do go cold. A lot of families have to, it's very difficult, the landscape at the moment, the economic landscape. However, there is areas that can be adjusted to serve the society. Okay, you're serving them with data and you're storing the data. Amazing. The AI data centers, the large language models, amazing. But the fundamentals are to create a sustainable way of designing and implementing not only AI data centers, all of the digital infrastructure that comes in play. You've got areas that sometimes overlook, like passive house, and that actually everything is intertwined. And obviously structured cabling is what people physically use when they log into their computers, when they log into servers, when they, where everything binds together. But the fundamentals is it should go seamless into the infrastructure because that's how it's going to be long-standing. A lot of the data centers that are not long-standing, that need to get demolished, are the ones that are not adapted to their ecosystems and essentially that are not built around the white space.
Well, an extension to what Ruqayyah mentioned, there's a misconception that BICSI is only about cabling. Okay, maybe copper, maybe fiber, but BICSI also teaches the members about safety, about security. What happens in a situation where there's a fire in a data center or exchange? What are the fire stop that has to be designed into? Where the holes are supposed to be? How big the holes for the cables to come in? Are the cables hazardous to health when the cable gets burned out?
Yeah.
So all those are things that BICSI will make sure that the members do practice the safety best practices. Because you don't want to get someone to design your data center or even your computer room with toxic cables.
You're correct. Yeah.
What happens if you have a data room and your fire extinguisher is water-based or your equipment's gone?
Yeah.
All this, and if there's a fire again, you don't want it to spread. These are part and parcel of what BICSI offers. It's not just about delivering the data, but also it ensures the safety of the people that works with it, the reliability of people who goes on top of it, and of course the sustainability and scalability. You don't design something that is usable today, but 2 years time you need to scrap it and rebuild it again.
Okay. So hearing you talk about that from the past to cable structure and safety, I want to ask you, what would you consider the top 3 mistakes that people are still making today when it comes to cable structuring? And what would be probably an easy fix for those?
Well, for me, my first one is about today versus maybe 10 years ago, is the scalability of it.
Okay.
Because let's say 10, 15 years ago, a data center doesn't grow exponentially because our life is not very digital. We're still using a lot of paper, a lot of more traditional media in communication. But today, you cannot leave your home without your phone.
Correct. Yes.
You cannot leave your daily life without looking at a screen. And that has an impact on data centers. The growth, the size of the data center is going so fast. What you plan today, which may last 5 years in the traditional design, may only last you 2 years. So the foresight of what you may need in 5 years has to be there. If not, you always hit a wall. And this can be space. It can be connectivity to the outside world. It can even be power. How much power does your data center require? I think previously data centers were in megawatts, 10, 20 megawatts. Fantastic. We were looking at gigawatts right now.
Yes.
So that kind of planning, to me, is the foresight of what you may need is very different. That's the mistake that we have.
I completely agree with that. It's spot on. It's imperative you get the design right. I came up with this analogy recently. It's a bit like when you go to the doctor and the doctor says you need surgery. Do you ask the doctor to perform surgery or do you go to the surgeon? To be an RCDD is to be a surgeon. Okay. And in relation to, I completely agree with Dr. Bernard says, the preparation is very important. What I've observed across the board is everybody wants to go from start to finish. And the design should be backwards. The design should be backwards. And that's the reason I'm saying that is understand what your clients and what their future capacity is going to grow to and then ensure that you design for 40% of its present day and leave capacity. Now, how you do that is you understand what it's going to be used for, what the data center is going to be used for, how to maintain the tenants of the data center in the future, because the last thing you want is it's going very well and then they want to scale and they have to go to another data center. So you want to ensure that you have that robust in place. As Dr. Bernard mentioned, it's going into gigawatts, and that requires craftsmanship of technical planning. And the craftsmanship that is required is doing it backwards, understanding how many fibers you can get into. Now, and I'm going to mention, because everybody mentions NVIDIA when it comes to AI data centers. NVIDIA is fiber to the chip. To the chip, there's a fiber, and then that interconnects to the cassette. Now, the amount of usage that you can get, and it's like, for example, you have a very good car. How fast you want to ride the car and have a cruise, it depends on the planning, and it depends on the journey and the destination and the route. The route is very important. If you can get more capacity in a white space, and that's the key word here, capacity and sustainability, with surgeons and architects and leading experts collaboratively in each field, they are able to design. There is designs in place that are working very well, that have amounted to the capacity of the future. So if you think of the amount of data that you're going to be used, we're just tip of the iceberg. AI has only been here around a couple of years. What's coming next is quantum. Quantum requires structured cabling like everything else, but quantum is very sensitive to the environment. And so everything needs to be handled with precision and also with scalability, but also foresight into what's coming.
Okay.
Second item, that mistakes. Was it mistakes that you were asking for? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's about planning not only the capacity, but the technology itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. It's far a bit odd in this way I mentioned it. Should you be investing on a legacy technology like out of context? Multi-mode OM1. Do you install it right now? Or should you go to OM4 to make sure that you can scale further in the future? Okay. And this is something that BICSI is trying to introduce to the rest of its members, what the technologies are coming. Multi-core fiber, for example, is one very key. I think finally we're starting to see adoption of multi-core fiber. We don't want to go into a system and like, what is this? Hollow core fiber is another one. And of course, all optical switching, robotic switching, all these are coming in. And the second mistake that a lot of network deploy is that they don't give provision for upgrades in these situations. They build it in and say, oh, I need to upgrade this to a certain technology to cater for higher speed. They have to rip everything out and rebuild from scratch. But instead, if you do it properly, say, okay, I can take this section out and replace it. That is also part of scalability and the foresight of technology change, and you keep yourself up to date for it.
Okay.
Just to add to that, because that seems together very well, harmoniously on the same page. When I said designing backwards, you're absolutely correct. How it's currently put in place is you have end-to-end, excuse the pun, this is how it, end-to-end, this is how it works. So you have the consultants that work with the architects, and they design the digital infrastructure. Then it gets put out to tender, and then you have the system integrators that install the system, and then you have the vendors, which is the cabling companies that sell to the system integrators, and essentially then everything gets built. Now, obviously the stakeholders and the stakeholders and the shareholders, they just want to see it get built. But what's interesting now is we're moving towards a time where the stakeholders are getting more involved in the design, and the design is getting more involved with and obviously the designers. You have to make sure that you are vendor neutral as a designer, because when you're designing a system, especially a bespoke system, and I say bespoke because some certain projects are tailor-made. AI data centers is one of them. Mm-hmm. You have to ensure as a designer, you are selecting the right, you are designing it to the right areas. And you also have to have a knowledge of the product base that is out there. You have to understand, like you mentioned, OM4 mm-hmm. and hollow fiber and things that are coming. You have to understand what you can design with. Mm. Taking it back to a simpler analogy, if you was to paint, you have to make sure that you first understand what you're drawing and you can visualize it and you have the vision of what you're drawing. And then bit by bit, you get the paints. You choose the right paints, colored paints, which is the right vendors and the right equipment. And then you put it all together, and then the structure cabling, trade toolsmen and the data engineers, they go in and they actually implement the design as they see. Mm. But also as a designer, you have to ensure that you are engaged within the step of installation as well, because you have to ensure that the installation is accurate to your designs. And there's a lot of problem solving and involved, and there's a lot of high pressure that needs to be remained calm, because you have to make sure that the precision of the network and the structure cabling, because remember, structure cabling does not move. Everything else moves. Everything else gets retrofitted. Mm. So a switch can be replaced and upgraded with another switch, but the permanent link and the structure cabling of the facility is permanent. And so that's why, especially with BICSI, they always do obviously redundancy paths is key in all areas, but they make sure that you provision for the capacity of the future. And that key word there is provision, but you can't provision unless you have a vision of what it's going to become.
Okay, so I have a question, because you mentioned structured cabling does not move, everything else does. Mm-hmm. So I have a question. So how do you decide between density and maintainability at that point?
What you would put there is you would make sure that you put a structure cabling system solution in place mm-hmm. that has the capacity mm-hmm. to, so say for example, if you go back, you've got single mode fiber and you've got multi-mode mm-hmm. fiber. You know, the ways in which it's installed, you've got blown fiber methods. Mm-hmm. Also, you've got, backbone methods as well. So it all goes down to the requirements of what that building is going to be used for or what that entity is going to be used for. When you understand the usage and you understand the usage, the distances and the areas mm-hmm. of key use, then you can then decide and plan and design in accordance to maintainability and also growth.
Okay. You know, my answer will be slightly different. Okay. Density and maintainability itself are not, it doesn't mean either one. It can be both. And it all down to the design concept and design exposure that we have. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because your design, by essence, will have a requirement, density. All right? Okay. Structured cabling will give you density. Because if you do, it's easy to do a connection. You take a very long patch cord and plug point A to point B. But there's no structure. And that will take up so much space, a waste of space. So you lose density. Okay. Uh-huh. So structured cabling gives you density. But at the same time, because structured cabling design will always have elements of maintainability in there, where to test, where to extract the cable if it's broken, or where to upgrade. Okay, mm-hmm. So these two, density and density and maintainability, are not exclusive. They can work together if you provide the right design concept.
Okay.
Another part about being a credential holder, our CDD, DC, is that we do need to get continuous education credits. Okay, the CEC points. And to get this, you need to update yourselves in conferences, in trainings, and more on. And coming back to the question about it's getting denser, and the technology is not static. So in order to achieve denser or higher speed and still maintain usability or maintainability, technology changes. And being part of this ecosystem of BICSI, it forces or encourages you to keep yourself updated, to provide the best solution available today to your client, or so that the network you design today will have the best chance of longevity moving forward. So again, we should not always view at these pros and cons, or density versus maintainability with the technology today. That is always changing. And that itself, by knowing what is coming or what is available that you can use and tap on, will be very key to provide both of this to the client. The client may then appreciate that you give a solution that provides everything that they want.
Okay. I want to change a little bit of the subject and talk about briefly data centers.
Okay.
So, I have a question regarding data centers, and this is for both of you.
Okay.
So, what are the design pivots for AI you're seeing fiber counts, connector choices, tray routing, or move the higher density enclosures?
Wow. So it's really denser, higher speed, and lower power, I guess.
Lower power?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
In terms of connectivity, as general connectivity, a few concepts, and tell me if I'm going off the tangent here, is joules per bit. Okay, joules per bit is one, where how much power do you require to transmit 1 bit? That is one of the key design challenges that all designers have today. Okay, and the direction that is going for data centers is to minimize the joules per bit right now. And the fiber is moving nearer to the chip in order to achieve that. A pluggable transceiver is approximately, if I'm not mistaken, 14, 15 joules per bit amount of energy that you need to transmit a bit. And moving to CPO, it's about 5 joules. So it's not joules, sorry, it's picojoules per bit. Okay. Story, different quantum of that. And that saves you, if you imagine how many bits are there that being transferred in a data center, you'll be going to kilowatts, megawatts, gigawatts. That is very key right now. And a lot of the design of data centers right now is based on that is a fundamental, reducing power per bit. Okay. But from there, things have to get smaller and nearer. So we have fiber connectivity to the chip. PIC coupling is very key. Then because of all this density of the fiber that goes in there, the density of the faceplate will go smaller as well. So you have also high performance or high speed transceivers like QSFP DD, OSFP, OSFP XDs, and so on, which needs a different type of interconnects. So I would say in most recent years, you see the birth of VSFF connectors. Again, that became a norm right now in most hyperscale data centers. Okay. After that, single mode fiber became the norm because of the speed and the distance that's required. We used to call data centers computer rooms.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, just
Almost a computer.
20, 25 years ago, it was called computer room. No bigger than 1,000 square feet, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Today, it's a whole city.
Yes.
And that also goes into that
Okay.
requirement for newer technology.
Okay.
But everything stems from how much power you need.
Okay.
Following on from that power, which is very important, is to understand in relation to when you're designing, is you need the power to cool down everything. But there are new and innovative ways of using less power. You can still achieve what you're wanting to achieve in terms of the output, but there's a smarter way of converging it from input to output. When you're going into the AI data centers, and I'm going to use the large language model data centers because they're at the forefront of this, you have to understand the gray space, obviously, is the mechanical and electrical and the plumbing of the data center. The white space is the converged network and the floor space, the realty space of the servers and the data halls and the data farm itself. Now, when you're having the connectivity and you're bringing it from the grid, because remember, telecommunications, you're bringing that from the grid, and the power, you're bringing that from the grid, and you're bringing what's outside in the grid inside and using it to essentially power and efficient and use what you've got to use it for. Now, in relation to the fiber to the chip, you can get more output because it's a direct line. And then when you're cooling down the data center, now I'm going to go into liquid cooling. Even in most recent terms, submerged cooling, bathtub cooling, when they put the servers in a bathtub, that's no longer being used. Why? Because of your point that you mentioned, density, and it's too big. Now what is happening is you have, in some areas, they have directly cooling to the chip itself. You can liquid cool the chip itself. So if you can cool down the chip and you've got the fiber coming into the chip, essentially you're at the root cooling it down as it heats up. And now there's different ways that you can do that, and different manufacturers and different wages. But the key fundamentally is the same. If you're able to cool down in real life terms the heat that is being generated from the output, then essentially you can reduce the amount of power you need to power the data centers. So if you're essentially cooling down the chips in real time as they're heating up, then by using a distributed pump system, and that reduces the chiller, because remember, all of this requires power, you're still getting the exact same output, but because of the design, and the key word is there, the design, you have to ensure that the design is sustainable, and the sustainability is maintained through understanding the whole ecosystem of the outside and inside. And so when you're using less power, and there is new technologies that are emerging, class 4 is one of them. And these different adaptations of the technology makes the technology as rapid as it is heading, it makes it sustainable within its steps.
Okay.
So in terms, if you can use less power but cool it down the same way, then essentially you can make it more sustainable.
Yes.
And if you're able to directly connect the chip itself, you're able to have a larger capacity of output. But remember, everything is connected to something. Everything is end to end. And so you have to ensure that each point, you can say checkpoint, from the submarine cabling to the public exchange to the local area network within AI data centers or within, buildings, within everything, society itself, you have to ensure that the pathways are done correctly to enable the growth of the continued usage. And going back to the packets that you mentioned, it's very important, because even within BICSI, you have the standards that are put in place for a reason, because the cables itself are going to be used continuously, day and night, throughout the years to come. So it's important that they're from the design to the installation, everything is done in the correct way, because if it's not, then you can incur more insertion losses, and also the insertion losses over time. In most recent times in the smart cities, they have to replace sensors all the time, maybe 6 months sometimes, because of the insertion loss within the actual what is connected to. So that just on a small scale, which is a large scale, it shows how imperative it is.
Before we finish, I want to do like a lightning round. I want to ask you guys a few questions.
Okay.
And these are related to what we discussed. So I want you to finish these sentences. So the next BICSI course everyone should take is?
RCDD.
RCDD?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say RCDD.
Okay. You both agreed.
Yeah.
And by the way, you play off of each other's responses very, very well. Okay, so the next finish your sentence. The biggest structured cabling myth in 10 words.
That everything is in the air.
Everything
Very
is in
true.
the air.
Very true.
Okay. One design smell that tells me the project will slip.
No cleaning.
No. Oh, yes. Of course.
Housekeeping. Yeah.
Okay. If I could standardize one more thing tomorrow, it could be? Or what would it be?
Standardize. That's a very
Ooh.
broad. That's a
I
broad.
stumped the geniuses.
Oh my God, there's so many things.
It's just, yeah.
Well, just pick one.
Okay. I'm looking forward to the standardization of quantum,
Oh.
because the quantum networks is going to get interesting, because, and I'm going to be very brief, you have to maintain the environmental factors when it comes to quantum, because the protons are so sensitive. If you think about right now in the world, we have the motorways, the highways of the structured cabling. Quantum's a boat. If you think about a yacht and a speedboat, that's quantum. It can go in any direction.
Okay.
But the pathways of quantum is nothing like our current binary setup. We have binary zeros and ones. Quantum goes zeros and ones at the exact same time. And then you can see how passionate I get. I just love it. I'm very, very embroiled in this. And you have to ensure that its pathway is very sensitive. So I would be very intrigued and interested about the standardization that comes out in relation to quantum, because I have my own hypotheses and efficiencies, but it would be interesting because the environmental factors is very important when it comes to quantum.
I'm not going to say no to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So to all our viewers, if this sparked ideas, please let us know, like any field questions that you might have. And I'm pretty sure Ruqayyah, Bernard would probably love to answer and hear them, and also send horror stories about the field, because I'm assuming there's millions and millions that
You're opening
people...
a Pandora's box on that.
Oh,
Yes, Pandora's.
I love a good debate. So, Ruqayyah Kechiche, Bernard Lee, thank you very much for joining this podcast. I do appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you guys shared with us today. I certainly consider myself a little bit smarter just listening to you guys.
You're very kind.
But thank you again.
No, thank
And
you.
to everyone watching, thank you, and see you on the next episode.